Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me here in person as well as virtually. My name is Vinodkumar Prabhakaran. I'm a senior research scientist at the Responsible AI and Human-Centered Technologies organization within Google Research. Today, I'll be presenting the paper titled Power to the People, Opportunities and Challenges for Participatory AI. This paper was led by the amazing Dr. Abeba Birhane while she was an intern at DeepMind's socio-technical AI research team, and is co-authored by my colleagues at DeepMind and Google, William Isaac, Mark Diaz, Madeleine, Elish, Iason, Gabriel, and Shakir, Mohamed. Unfortunately, Abeba could not be here in person, so I'm stepping in to present the paper. Okay. So the context of this paper is the fact that artificial intelligence has taken a participatory turn. That is evidenced by the numerous number of papers that are happening or that are published on this topic in the last in recent years. And so I just want to set the context that this is more on the topic of sort of like artificial intelligence, the community of artificial intelligence researchers and practitioners, like applying it to various applications using participatory methods to sort of like bring community involvement. This leads us to the question of what does meaningful participation entail and what is participation expected to do? In this paper, we attempt to clarify the answers to that question by situating the participation as a practice within the historical development of this process, discussing its relationship with existing power structures, as well as its limitations and concerns. I'll start with the genealogy of participation as a practice, since there are many historical lessons that we can learn, especially AI practitioners and researchers can learn from these historical lessons. So I'll start with a quote. This is a quote from a French poster by in Atelier Populaire. This is held at the Vienna Museum in London. I do not speak French, so I'm not going to butcher the quote. So in English, it means I participate, you participate, he participates, we participate, you participate, they profit. This quote occurs widely in various works that talk about participation, and it poetically captures the cycles of sort of enthusiasm and excitement of using participation as a remedy for many problems of social life, but ending up with a sense of disenchantment or sort of exploitation, and with the asymmetrical power relationships that exist in the society being left unchanged. So I'll start with sort of like an account of like history of participation as a practice or the development of that. Over the past decades, participatory efforts have seen really good applications, successful applications in many cases in domains such as international development, healthcare provision, and science and so on. And a lot of these efforts can be traced back to the work of Scandinavian researchers in the 1980s and 70s and 80s, where participation is concerned or sort of conceived primarily as a way to create what they call workplace democracy, understood as a system of sort of like a structured consultation and dialogue between workers and employers with the aim of giving workers more autonomy and control over deciding wages and work practices and allocation of tasks and so on. Another similar approach is the British socio-technical systems approach that was aimed to promote workers' autonomy through active participations on how technology is used in workers' day-to-day lives or within that socio-technical systems. And today we have numerous ways of doing participatory work through interviews, scenarios, role plays, citizen juries, and so on. However, the notion of participation has also been used historically in questionable ways. For instance, participation arguably played a central role in colonial projects back in the time of British colonial empire. Enforcing the way it manifested was by enforcing a hierarchical division of power using the authority of local rulers and local authorities as a way for essentially claiming legitimacy under the veneer of participation. This demonstrates that participation could end up simply masking existing power differentials that exist in a relationship and leaving the status quo unchanged. One of the most astute critiques in this vein was raised by Arnstein, who established this widespread sort of image of ladder of participation that provided a linear model with which to characterize participation efforts from on one end being extractive to the other end being empowering. Arnstein writes that participation without redistribution of power is an empty and frustrating process for the powerless. It allows the power holders to claim that all sides were considered, but makes it possible for only some of those sides to benefit. It maintains the status quo, essentially. This is a quote from Arnstein's book. So that just sort of sets the kind of like that historical context and sort of like some of the pitfalls or like problems there. Now I move on to the various participatory efforts, specifically within the technology industry. In the US, participatory research or design was widely adopted by large corporations creating office technologies back in the 70s and 80s as well. And these efforts were largely intended to sort of increase the efficiency or increase the quality of products, reducing time, cost, and so on. And scholars, and more recently, scholars have also characterized engaging in social media by just general public also as a mode of participation, as a mode of participation, namely mediated participation. That is participation through the medium of technology. So this is not just an exhaustive list of like, different ways of participation happening in technology in general, but just like few examples. And this line of participation is also not without flaws, but one thing that I want to point out here is that this particular set of things that I talked about is markedly different from the historical ones, in which here the focus here the focus of participation is not on worker autonomy or empowerment, rather primarily as a means to for economic efficiency. Right? And while this is in and of itself not a bad thing, it is something to take note of, like when participation, like the focus of the participation, what is the focus of the participation? And also, on the other hand, on the mediated participation front, it is often that participation without, people are participating in, if you think about that as participation, people are participating in those activities without being aware of like that they are participating, which brings us to other aspects of participation, such as consent and the ability to refuse to participate. So arguably, in the case of like the social media participation, it's questionable, like, how much agency you have to like refuse to participate if that has become sort of like so commonplace for like conversations with public. Now, moving on to participation within the field of AI, and this is relatively, the term participation came to a participatory AI came about like relatively recently, but arguably a lot of like sort of community participation sort of happened in things like data collection in the AI development process. And for instance, ImageNet, which was some sort of like revolutionary, have played a revolutionary role in the AI discipline, was utilizing 49,000 raters to sort of like rate images, and these raters came from around the globe. And similarly, a lot of human-in-the-loop sort of AI systems use participation through like people's from around the world, like being part of like making decisions of like content moderation, for instance, kind of context. And more recently, there are also more participatory approaches in AI involving communities at different points of time of AI pipeline. And this includes like problem formulation, ML auditing, citizen juries, information disclosures, like such as transparency artifacts, such as model cards, and so on. And these modes of participation also are not without potential risks. For instance, researchers have pointed out that there are abuses in the crowd work settings, and the concentration of such ghost work in low-income countries, usually based in global south. And researchers have also pointed out the potential risk of participation washing, where the participation or the act of the practice of participation is not done earnestly, and it does not lead to much effect to the participants or to the products or projects that they're working on. In the paper, we go into a little bit more depth of like these themes that I discussed, but the main takeaways from that analysis was the set of attributes of participation that kind of like percolated up. Things like reciprocity, reflexivity, empowerment, and things like timing and duration. When do you involve people in participatory efforts, and like how long they are involved, and so on. And another thing that we that we realized is that there's no you can't just say that like one kind of participation is better than the other, like in the absolutes, because different participation modes like may have some of these attributes like may actually matter in that case rather than the other. And in order to, so in the paper, we also give sort of like a questionnaire of sorts as a reflexive exercise for asking for practitioners to ask these questions when they are actually engaging participatory AI, participatory methods in AI, like how, how does these kind of like attributes kind of, where does their effort like fall into these attributes? And we also kind of like laid out like three different umbrellas of like current modes of participatory AI. A lot of participatory AI focuses on algorithmic performance improvement, so specifically focused on a particular model or particular kind of technology. There's also a lot of participatory AI on process improvement, that basically the underlying processes of the AI development lifecycle. And then also things like collaborative problem formulation sort of falls under the collective exploration space. And in the paper, we have like three brief case studies, specifically taking specific examples of participatory efforts in the AI space, and looking at how this framework sort of like maps onto that. Here, for the time constraints, I'm only going to go through one single case study, and which is the case study, a case of Maori data rights, which is an effort that I forget the exact timing, like maybe a year or two ago. As part of a Tehuku NLP project, the Maori community in New Zealand built around 300 hours of audio data of the Maori language. And they established the Maori data sovereignty protocols at the end of that project in order to take control over the data and the technology that can be built on top of the data. And the community argued that sharing the data invites commercial actors to shape the future of their language by those with no connection, have no connection to the language. But by not sharing the data, they maintain autonomy and the right to self-determination. They argue that if any technology is to be built using such community source data, it must directly benefit the Maori people. And this is like of particular importance when seeking to utilize participatory mechanisms to achieve methodological innovation, or where the process yields unique insights that can inform new innovations in new technologies, technological artifacts. And under the framework that we talked about earlier, this could be categorized as, or characterized as participation for collective exploration. And this is a good example for very high on reciprocity, because it prioritizes the net benefit to the participants and making sure that there is a proportionate return for the value of the participatory engagement. It is high on empowerment. It empowers the community to actually be the decision makers on how the resource could be used. And also in terms of duration, the community is involved in the entire span of even maintaining the resource. And before closing, I'll talk briefly about the limitations and concerns of participatory AI. And we give this 5 higher level themes, and this is not meant as exhaustive. First, it is first is democratic governance. That is, participation is not the best mechanism for decisions, values, norms that are better decided through democratic processes that are existing in society. It's not to replace democratic institutions or governance and laws. It does a very specific thing within the AI development. It is not meant as like replacing democracy. It is also not. It should not also not be. It has a tendency to be conflated with other activities such as inclusion without like engagement, like having agency to like vote and so on, is not participation. And as I mentioned earlier, participatory activities have this risk of being co-opted to claim legitimacy for other reasons. And it is also very difficult to measure measure the effectiveness of participatory AI, especially in cases when the existing sort of incentives or structures require things to be quantified, like the effectiveness be quantified. So that participatory AI participation may not really lend itself for like such measurements. And finally, expertise and incentives, that is, the participatory work puts an epistemic burden on all stakeholders in the participatory process, but it varies from context to context, like person to person, the kind of expertise that is being brought in, all that matters. And also the people participating in these activities may be participating with very different motivations. So cash incentives might work in certain contexts, but some contexts, for instance, in the Maori case, it was not the cash, but like about saving a particular language, or that community was like the motivation. So I think those kind of concerns like make it much more difficult to kind of deal with this in the space, but basically things to be paying attention for. And in conclusion, I'll start by saying participation holds great potential for beneficial, emancipatory, and empowering technology design, development, and deployment, while also being at risk of these concerns. It is imperative that we as an AI practitioners and researchers, consider these risks when engaging in participatory methods in AI. And as I mentioned earlier in this paper, we try to answer some of these questions and give a framework to think about these issues, but it is not meant as sort of like the end point of this. It's something to sort of like a reflective exercise. With that, I'll stop. Thank you. Ready for any questions?
Hi, quick question, if you don't mind. So you've talked a lot about sort of these participatory methods, and it seems when building new AI, it sort of seems like this was the application. In thinking about maybe ways like industry might have already built AI on global populations in some ways, is there a way to sort of, or do you have any reflections on how maybe some of that participatory nature could be like clawed back, where you could we have, as an example, like Google, right, has a lot of products and services that are built using user data to different levels of, let's say, participatory engagement, right? Do you think that, yeah?
If I understand correctly the question, if existing practices within industry, tech industry in building technology using participatory methods, could we bring back?
Is there a way to sort of, these products that already exist that were maybe built, let's say, without user consent, without like making an accusation necessarily, without user consent, is there a way to sort of re-engage with these products and user consent to sort of create new products? Or
that's a great question. I want to start by saying I'm a Google researcher. I'm not a product person. I'm not representing Google's position here. But I also don't know if like, yeah, I think the most of the work we were looking at was in terms of participatory AI in a different sense, not like the using the user data kind of situation. But it is a very complex question about like, consent and ability to, I think you're referring to a particular slide where talking about like, engaging in social media in general, like, lends yourself like participating to create AI. And yeah, it is a complex question. I don't really have an answer. It will be very hand-wavy, but I have come across these questions in various points, not personally me dealing with it, but seen others dealing with these questions about, I think, Flickr data, for instance, like Flickr, for instance, like, so there was consent in like a particular way, but like then Flickr was acquired by other people, and then the things changed, and like, the meaning of what consent was given, like that changed, and it was very difficult to sort of like understand how do we make sure that this is a responsible consent with which we are using this data. I know that it was not an easy call, and there's like, I don't think it ended up in an ideal situation either, but that data has been used by so many computer vision researchers, both in industry and in academia, and it's powering a lot of like work. But how do you give agency back to the people who made those photos and shared it with Flickr? So yeah, I think it's very complex, and it varies from context to context. Thank you.
We have time for one last question as we transition to speakers.
Do you want to set up?
Hi. I was wondering if you could talk more about the relationship between participation and democratic governance. Like when you mentioned like there's a danger of it being a replacement for like democratic governance structures, and like could you talk more about the trade-offs and like what the dangers are?
Yeah. So can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I think the point there was that just because you're bringing in participation from communities, it doesn't mean that it can actually stand in for like other sort of like ways of like, laws were formed, or like other democratic institutions like make decisions. For instance, democratic institutions often make decisions in the context of sort of like preserving rights of the community, rights of the people, and there's like a very different focus there. The participatory AI is not a replacement for that. Participatory AI should be taken as like in the context of building AI technologies, how do we bring in communities to sort of like make sure that this technology works in benefits the company, benefits the communities, but it is not like a replacement for government, like, government level. I mean, it is not the something to like, make laws based on. Like that should go through the democratic process.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.